Hello again, good evening, welcome to the programme. If you're a regular watcher, you'll know that we often discuss the football transfer market here and the often obscene amounts of money changing hands in that. What you might not be aware of is that there is also a very lively transfer market within the media, and sometimes the amounts involved in there are equally obscene. For instance, Chris Evans, a lucrative move, presumably, from Radio 2 to Virgin Radio, and here in this area, tongues wagging about Rob Staton's transfer from BBC Radio Sheffield to BBC Radio Humberside. Welcome, Rob.
No, thanks, Alan. I think Chris Evans is probably Neymar going from Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain, and I'm more like the journeyman who's having one last shot in the Evo Stick Premier Division, so I think that's probably the comparison there.
Well put. You do yourself down a bit. I actually think that Chris Evans took inspiration from your move and thought, I'm having some of that.
We're all having a change.
Yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, lots of people, quite rightly, are lamenting your departure from this area after quite a long time. I think 7 years full-time at Radio Sheffield?
Yeah, so it's about 10 years that I was first offered an opportunity to be the Rotherham United reporter, and will be eternally grateful to Seth Bennett and Paul Walker, who gave me an opportunity. I'd been working at Rotherham for a long time as the club commentator and got a chance, and then a few years later full time, and always dreamt of doing praise. I can remember it like it was yesterday, the first ever Praise or Grumble I did, and it was at Hillsborough, and I can remember just before I went on air thinking, I can't believe I'm going to do Praise or Grumble. I just, this was something that I'd grown up listening to. And getting that chance to do it and then being able to do it for as long as I have has just been a privilege. It's an institution in this region, Football Heaven and Praise or Grumble, and there's nothing like it. I've listened to, this is not to do down BBC local radio sport, but there is nothing like Football Heaven or Praise or Grumble anywhere else in the country. So it's been an honour and a privilege to do it. I love the people that I've been able to talk to and the characters that phone in. And I'm going to miss the heck out of it.
Yeah, 10 years is a long time, your involvement within Radio Sheffield. And in part two, we're going to meet your replacement, if you like,
yeah.
who's been brought in as part of the transfer deal, Adam Oxley. We'll meet him, for those who haven't heard him on the radio. I'm sure most of you have, in part two. And James Gregg will join us to round up on this weekend's a big one, in particular for non-league football. So all the local non-league football clubs will get a mention in the region, not just within Sheffield, on a weekend when there's no Premier League and no Championship. Got to ask you the logical first question then, if you enjoyed it so much as you have, why move at this time? I know, in fact, you're taking over as sports editor at BBC Radio Humberside, but I've no doubt loads of people have asked you, why move at this time?
Just because I want to be a sports editor and I want to have that opportunity. It's an experience that I want to have. I know a lot of the guys over at Humberside anyway. It's an opportunity to do different things. It's a slightly different role than some of the other sports editors' jobs in local radio. For example, it's not a radio sports editor's job, it's multimedia, so there's going to be involving working with Look North and doing some TV, which I've always wanted to do. It's a shame it didn't happen before I lost all my hair, but nothing I can do about that now unless I buy a wig, and a chance to do some radio and some digital and take on a new challenge and go for it. My wife's in-laws live pretty close to Hull. They live in sort of Market Wheaton sort of area, so I know the region fairly well, so I'm looking forward to it. New challenge, why not go for it?
A challenge in more ways than one. When you look at the status relatively of some of the football clubs over in that area and what's happening in this area, we'll talk about your thoughts on United and Wednesday in particular and your highlights from your time a bit later. But you're going to an area that's got its problems and its challenges within Hull City, for instance, struggling in the Championship. Grimsby Town in League Two. Scunthorpe United again have changed their manager. So it's a bit like a football manager will move club, but usually the club he's going to has got problems he's got to sort out. In a strange sort of way, you're going into an area which has had problems.
Well, I hope the Hull fans don't think I'm going to sort out the issues that they see at the football club, because that might be beyond my ability there. But I like it. I think that a patch where there's a lot going on, and there is at the moment, and not just with the football teams, it's a huge, passionate rugby patch. Yeah. Hull FC. have had a very difficult year. I think they just lost 80-10, which is the biggest defeat by a Super League team in a long time. And Adam Pearson, who we're obviously very familiar with from a football perspective, is there, and he's promised big changes. So I'm looking forward to being able to cover what is a big time for the 2 rugby clubs, 3 football clubs, as you mentioned. There's something going on with all of them, but I like that. It's similar to here because there's been something going on at Wednesday or United for the whole time that I've been here. Rotherham have had this great rise from having to go to the from Don Valley Stadium to the New York. Barnsley have had promotions, relegations. Looks as if they're going to have another promotion this year with the way they've started. Donny's had a great journey during my time working at Radio Sheffield, and of course Chesterfield at the moment.
Yeah.
You wonder when they're going to hit rock bottom, and is this it, or is there even a further step? Because you keep thinking that the next thing is going to be the last thing, and it isn't. So it's been a very dramatic time football-wise here. So I'm looking forward to covering 5 different clubs, 2 different sports predominantly, looking at other sports as well, and getting into it.
Yeah, rugby league, is that something that you follow?
It's something that I wish I had a chance to follow more. So when I was a teenager, when I was about 13, 14, I actually had a season ticket at the Eagles. And the first year I had a season ticket, and one of my mates at school, his brother was 18, and he went to watch the Sheffield Eagles. And he said, "Oh, do you want to come and watch the Eagles with me?" And so I did. And it was very handy having an 18-year-old friend, by the way, when you're only 14, when it comes to sneaking a half a pint in the bar before the game. And that season, funnily enough, was the year that the Eagles won the Challenge Cup. So we went to every game. We were going to Castleford. We went to Leeds to see them beat Salford in the semi-finals. We went to Wembley to watch them beat Wigan in the final, and followed them home and away for a couple of years. So it is a sport I'm familiar with, not as much as Andy Giddins, and I'm sure I'll be leaning on him because he's a big rugby man for some advice and some tips. But I'm looking forward to getting stuck into that.
Yeah, I mean, you're very much into NFL, and you tweet and blog on that. So there are similarities.
Yeah, there are some. They can throw it forward in the NFL, not in the rugby. But apart from that, there are some similarities. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back in a minute to sort of the political problems that surround Hull City and have done for quite a while now. Grimsby Town trying to cement their Football League status effectively, and Scunthorpe with yet another new manager in Stuart McCall. But firstly, United on Wednesday, and have you any favourite memories, highlights from across your time?
Yeah, I mean, loads. With Wednesday United specifically, it was great to watch United's recent rise under Chris Wilder, and it seems like it's a rise that hasn't finished yet. That there's still maybe another step to go, and the Premier League and getting there. See, I mean, if you'd have said that 2 years ago, it would have been a bit of a pipe dream. But now it looks, the way that they hammered Aston Villa, it looks like a possibility. So that's been great to sort of follow United's rise under Chris. I think watching United get to the FA Cup semi-final, where they, funnily enough, lost to Hull City in the semi-final, was a great. I can remember interviewing Michael Doyle on the pitch at Bramall Lane after they beat Charlton in the quarter-finals, and he broke down in tears. And we were stood right in front of the Kop when that happened. And I can just remember thinking, what an emotional moment that really sort of captured who Michael Doyle was. Great guy. He'd had a bit of stick at times from some of the fans, and it was great to sort of see him have that moment, and to be part of that was great. And then to go to Wembley and watch United in a semi-final, and they were winning 2-1 at half-time, and I can remember saying to Paul Walker, they might do this, they might get to the FA Cup final, League One team, and one from our region might actually get to the FA Cup final. So those were sort of the favourite memories with United. I think watching Wednesday get to Wembley was a big one, and even though, again, they lost the Hull City in the semi-finals as a trend.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, well, I think that day, because Wednesday it was a disappointing performance on Wednesday that day, but I can remember the fans just made that afternoon. I think the atmosphere, I've been to Wembley with all of the clubs except Donny, because I wasn't around when they beat Leeds. I've been with all the clubs, and I've seen England there, I've seen NFL games there, and I've never heard an atmosphere like that day. And the national journalists like Henry Winter were talking about it afterwards. All the national journalists, Steve Bruce said after the game that he thought that was going to get Wednesday over the line. It was incredible, and even though Wednesday didn't win that game, that sort of memory of the atmosphere from to our right hand side, from where our commentary position was, will live long in the memory. And I wish there was a few more. I wish we could talk about promotion to the Premier League or a cup victory in my time, Alan, but not to be the case.
Not to be the case, but still eventful times, working with any number of managers, characters, people that you will remember for the right reasons, and sometimes we have people that we kind of remember for the wrong reasons, don't we? Who are the main characters that will live long in your memory from the time?
Well, I can remember some very interesting managers who, more recently, I think have been. Carlos Carvalho was always decent for a quote, and I enjoyed interviewing him. And I think he was very skillful in not answering certain questions, but doing it in kind of still doing it in a fun way rather than necessarily just a complete straight bat. And I think he was an interesting character to interview. I can remember Gary Megson once gave me a great lesson as a journalist, because I remember Oldham and Wednesday beaten Oldham 2-0, and I'd probably been in the job full time about 6 months. And I said, and it was a bit of a softball question to Gary Megson. I just said, Gary, congratulations, you've won 2-0. How pleased are you with that? And his answer was, that's the stupidest question I've been asked all week. And I can remember just thinking, how do I react to that? But in a way, that was kind of good to sort of have that kind of a reaction from a manager, because it made me think about it and how I would act next time if a manager said that. I certainly would have reacted differently today than I would have acted in 2011. And I enjoyed interviewing Stuart Gray. I thought he was a really good guy, and did a very good job at Sheffield Wednesday. And then there's been a lot of interest. Steve Evans is someone very interesting to follow. Ronnie Moore, when he was at Rotherham United as well. Chris Wilde is always very good value to interview. It's good to interview people like Nigel Clough as well. So I'm probably forgetting people. There seems to be a manager every year at a lot of the clubs, so you kind of forget who you've ended up speaking to. Yeah,
it's funny because managers all have different methods, and the ideal ones are usually the ones that treat individual players differently. I mean, for instance, Neil Warnock would. You get the best out of everyone by treating them differently. And it's true as well for us interviewing managers, isn't it? What would be a perfectly acceptable question to one manager, for instance, the one you asked Gary Megson, I'm sure that probably 99 out of 100 would have just come off the back of it and said, well, I'm delighted, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I knew never to ask him that again.
That each one has a particular foible, and it's almost like you're having to ask the same question, but in a different way to different types. Does that make sense?
I think it is. I think one of the things, I'm not trying to say that I've got all the answers to this, because I haven't. You learn something with every manager you end up meeting, but I think one of the most important things to do is to work out quite quickly what kind of a question is just going to get a bit more out of a manager than otherwise would. If you start, I think with Carlos being a good example, he never wanted to talk about injuries. His answer would always be, ask the physios. So if you start a press conference, what's the latest on this player? Or how is your squad? Have you got any doubts this? You just knew you weren't going to get an answer, and it didn't warm him up, it didn't get him going. So I think you'd have to go a different route with that. But then another manager, that might be the perfect way to start and get him warmed up. So I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. How do you see the status, position, promise, prospects of the two Sheffield clubs as you leave? Because we're talking off the back of 4 successive wins by Sheffield United, 3rd in the Championship, 3 successive wins by Sheffield Wednesday, potentially turning their season. It's time for you to change your mind, mate.
Well, I think it's good that they've had difficult starts. I mean, United lost the first 2 league games and then have won 4. And Wednesday, after the Brentford game, I think a lot of people wondering where are they going to go? Could they even be looking over the shoulder? There was a transfer embargo had just been lifted when they lost that Brentford game, so there was a lot of concern there. And they've won 3 in a row. And I think you've got to credit. Coming back to United in a second, I think Luca deserves a lot of credit, because after that game he sort of talked a bit. He was tough in his talk. His press conference, I think, before the Wolves game was the best one he's had, because he came out and just made it very clear, I don't care who you are. And I don't think he didn't call out Forestieri.
Before the Millwall game, wasn't it? Yeah. But after
it was, for me, the best one was before the Wolves game. So it was after the Millwall and Ipswich game. Yeah. And he didn't call out Forestieri. It'd be wrong to suggest that he did. Yeah. But he mentioned him and said, essentially his performance wasn't good enough in the recent games. It was a lot better when he came on against Ipswich for 20 minutes, and if he shows that kind of attitude, then he can be part of this, and he will be in the team. And I want to see that. I expect a certain level of passion and commitment from the players, and I think it resonates. And I think you look at them now, and they're not the finished article. I mean, they really should have beat Reading 4-0 on Saturday.
Right.
They won 2-1 and were hanging on a bit at the end. But I think with the younger players, I think Matt Penny's been great. I think Dawson's deserves more credit than he's got so far this year. Thornley looks great. You've got a team there that just seem to be pulling together and are going to move this team forward now. And as for United, they look great. And maybe Alan, I don't think there's too much. I've seen some of the top teams. I watched Middlesbrough, West Brom the other day. I do think Middlesbrough's going to be up there, but I don't think there's 6 or 7 teams better than Sheffield United in this division. So as long as they can avoid what happened last year, which was they got to the turn of the year as one of the big candidates, and then it kind of fell. As long as they can avoid that this year, then they've got every chance of being up there.
Key perhaps, they've got 2 players who can do that midfield linking role now.
Yeah.
It might be a challenge how Chris Wilder fits both Paul Coots and Oliver Norwood in, but there is that safety net, whereas one big player was missing and badly missed actually last season, Paul Coots. You've got a couple who can play that role now. But
Norwood looks great. Norwood looks really good.
Never seen a new player have so much impact so quickly, just so influential. I had the pleasure of seeing the Aston Villa game, and no amount of superlatives were enough to say how brilliant and exceptional and breathtaking Sheffield United were. But noticeably, Chris Wilder, I've seen Chris Wilder in a more upbeat mood after a narrow defeat, where his side have played well, than I saw him last Saturday. It didn't surprise me, but I could tell that others who were less used to him were kind of thinking, you've just won 4-1, mate. Yeah. That's clever management.
Yeah, and it's something he did after the Leeds game at Ellen Road last year, because I remember going down to interview him after that, and United were amazing. I think that's when they went top of the league, either for the first time or they went back top having won that game, and went down there expecting Chris to be saying, well, what a great performance, and because that's what everybody was saying up in the press box. And he went, well, I wasn't happy about this and I wasn't happy about that, and I think we could have been better today. And my reaction was to say to him, what, really? How can you say that? And I think it is sometimes as a manager, he'll know better than you or I that if you've had a performance like that, of sort of managing the expectation and managing your team so that they keep focused after a win like that's important. And I think that's probably what he was doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's clearly what he was doing. He didn't fool us, kind of thing. Underneath he was turning cartwheels.
Oh yeah,
that's for sure. Absolutely, we just didn't see him.
Yeah.
Across the city, I agree with you about Josh Lukai. I think he deserves far more credit than he's been given, because for a man who until latterly was confined to one single foray into the transfer market, for a player who's not proved popular with the crowd, even though he has a probably hidden value in the job that he does.
Yeah.
This guy has managed to refresh the club from within by, he may have had little choice, but by boldly bringing so many young players in, and it's given a whole new feel to the place. And so many young players at one time to be blooded, in my experience, is, I think, unique. I don't think I've ever known 10 within a year.
I think it's overdue at Wednesday, though, isn't it? I mean, for so long they haven't really produced anybody, and I think what Matt Penny more than anybody has shown is that when you compare him to the left backs that they've had at Alan over the years, he might not be vastly superior to them, but he's certainly no worse than them. And this guy should have probably had a chance 18 months ago. I mean, I think he's 2021. What's taken so long for him to be given an opportunity? He looks at home in that spot, and so does Jordan Thornley, and he's mature as well. And I think that same with Dawson and Wildsmith, they've got good head on the shoulders, very similar to some of the young players that have come through at Sheffield United over the years. So it's about time these young players got a chance. They're producing for Wednesday. It's a big test for them after the international breaks. They've got a tough run of games, teams that you'd expect to be at the top. So that is going to be a challenge for them. You have to remember they've beaten Millwall are in a bad run of form, Ipswich and Reading may well be down there.
That's true.
Struggling at the end of the year. So now is the big test. You get 2 weeks off, you've got to come back and go again, and you've got to take on some of the best in the division.
Yeah, and the youngsters have been the huge silver lining to the cloud at Hillsborough, in these circumstances, bringing those through. Right, that's part one. Rob stays in part two. We're not going to replace him, even though the man who is replacing him at BBC Radio Sheffield will be joining us, along with James Gregg. Take a 5-minute break. Hope you can rejoin us after that. See you then.